Let's face it, when most people picture the world's most terrifying fighter jets, their minds jump straight to the stars and stripes. America has spent decades perfecting the art of turning tax dollars into thunder. Russia, meanwhile, loves to build things that look like they were designed in a doomsday lab. But Sweden gives us sensible cars, minimalist furniture, and peace prizes. It's the last place you'd expect a world-class warplane to come from. Yet, deep in the Scandinavian forests, engineers at Saab were quietly building something extraordinary. They weren't chasing size or spectacle. They were pursuing a single, elegant idea that smart beats big. The result was the JS-39 Gripen, a small one-engine aircraft that looked more like a curious experiment than a symbol of power. When it first appeared in the 1990s, Western analysts smirked. To them, it was a polite little machine, nice, efficient, but hardly threatening. A fighter jet for people who drink tea and believe in neutrality, one Pentagon officer reportedly joked. The world's military establishment saw the Gripen as a compromise jet, cheap, light, and built for a nation that hadn't fought a major war in 2 centuries. It had a Volvo engine. It could take off from highways. It could be maintained by a handful of conscripts with a toolbox and a checklist, and that was precisely the point. Sweden wasn't building a parade piece. It was designing a survival tool for the unthinkable, a sudden war on home soil against a numerically superior enemy. While the rest of the world poured billions into stealth coatings and space-age systems, Saab focused on practicality. The Gripen was meant to be fueled, armed, and turned around in under 10 minutes. It could land on a frozen stretch of road and be airborne again before enemy bombers even reached the horizon. Every screw, every wire, every panel had a purpose. For years, the jet remained an underdog, admired by pilots but ignored by power brokers. Countries with tight budgets quietly bought it, while the world's major powers turned their attention to something far more glamorous: the F-35 Lightning II. The F-35 wasn't just a fighter. It was a monument to human ambition. Designed to be everything to everyone, it came in 3 versions: the F-35A for the Air Force, the F-35B for the Marines with vertical takeoff, and the F-35C for the Navy's carrier decks. It was wrapped in the most advanced stealth materials known to man. Its software contained more lines of code than Facebook, and its helmet cost more than a Ferrari. In theory, it could detect, track, and destroy enemies long before they even knew it was in the sky. By 2015, the jet's mythology had grown into something biblical. To own one was to join the elite club of nations with cutting-edge air power. To fly one was to wield the eyes of God. The F-35 program had already consumed hundreds of billions of dollars, more than the GDP of some small countries. But for Washington, it was the price of staying on top. So when whispers began to circulate that Sweden's budget plane had outmaneuvered an F-35 at a multinational exercise, few believed it. Yet the story was true, and it didn't happen in some obscure test range. It happened at Red Flag, the world's most prestigious air combat exercise, held in the Nevada desert. Red Flag is where reputations are made or shattered. For 2 weeks, pilots from across the world face off in complex simulated battles that mimic real warfare. Radar emissions are tracked. Missiles are logged virtually. Every move is recorded, analyzed, and debriefed. The results rarely leak, unless something truly shocking happens. On that particular exercise, Swedish pilots arrived with their Gripens, compact, light, and bristling with electronic warfare gear. Across the runway sat the American F-35s, shimmering under the Nevada sun like high-tech predators. On paper, it was no contest. The F-35 could see everything. The Gripen was supposed to see nothing. But what the Americans underestimated was how quiet genius can beat brute technology. From the moment the exercise began, the Gripen pilots knew they were being hunted. The F-35's stealth meant it could fire before being detected. But the Swedes had prepared meticulously. Instead of chasing invisible ghosts on radar, they used the Gripen's data link system, a digital brain that connects every aircraft in a formation into one living network. If one jet saw a signal, they all saw it instantly. They also had something else up their sleeves, an electronic warfare suite so advanced that even NATO analysts privately call it black magic. It can jam, deceive, and feed false targets into an opponent's sensors. The Gripen pilots switched tactics. They stopped looking for the F-35. Instead, they made the F-35 look for them. Every piece of data the F-35 shared, every whisper of communication in its encrypted net, became a trail of breadcrumbs. The Swedes followed the faint electromagnetic scent, slipping through radar shadows and terrain folds. They flew low, hugging the desert floor, using mountains as natural shields. They moved like ghosts, visible to each other, invisible to their enemy. Minutes later, the impossible happened. The Gripen closed the distance. The dogfight began. In close combat, the laws of physics matter more than the price tag. The F-35, weighed down by internal weapon bays and stealth geometry, couldn't turn as sharply as the Delta Canard Gripen. The Swedes pulled high-G maneuvers that would make most pilots black out. Within seconds, they were on the F-35's tail. The simulated missile lock tone sounded in the American pilot's headset. Kill confirmed. It wasn't just luck. Across multiple engagements, the same thing happened. The little Swedish jet that the world had laughed at won. When reports reached the debriefing rooms, jaws dropped. The invincible trillion-dollar program had just been humbled by a nation better known for IKEA and pop music. Even the Swedish pilots, ever humble, didn't gloat. They just smiled politely and said, "It's a good aircraft." Behind closed doors, the U.S. Air Force downplayed the results. Officially, red flag scores are classified. Unofficially, the message spread like wildfire across defense circles. Stealth was not invincible. A clever pilot with the right tools could still washes the veil. The implications were profound. For decades, the world had equated military power with cost and complexity. The Gripen shattered that illusion. It showed that in the age of digital warfare, adaptability and electronic cunning could rival stealth and raw power. A single F-35 costs roughly $80 to $100 million to procure and around $36,000 per flight hour to operate. A Gripen costs about $30 million and flies for $5,000 an hour. That means a small air force could field 6 Gripens for the price of one Lightning II and keep them flying longer. In a prolonged war, that math could decide who owns the skies. The Swedish philosophy was never about domination. It was about endurance. Saab engineers built a fighter that could lose 10 times and still get up for the 11th round. It can refuel and rearm on a country road, serviced by a ground crew of 5. It can swap engines in under an hour. It's the fighter equivalent of a Swiss watch. Elegant, efficient, and built to work when everything else breaks. Meanwhile, the F-35 remains a technological marvel, but also a logistical nightmare. It relies on a global supply chain, proprietary software updates from Lockheed Martin, and maintenance systems so complex that smaller nations sometimes wait weeks for approval to patch a fault. For the US, those costs are manageable. For everyone else, they're crippling. That's why Sweden's little jet has become a quiet favorite among smaller NATO members and nations seeking independence from American systems. Brazil, Hungary, and the Czech Republic all fly Gripens. Others, like Finland and Thailand, have studied it closely. The message is clear. In a world where wars are fought as much with bandwidth as with bullets, flexibility matters more than flash. What happened at Red Flag wasn't just a tactical upset, it was a philosophical one. The Gripen didn't prove that stealth was useless. It proved that intelligence and integration could level the field. It was David with a data link, standing against Goliath's billion-dollar shadow. In many ways, the story mirrors a broader truth about modern defense. The future belongs not to the biggest spender, but to the smartest innovator. Artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, and unmanned drones are rewriting the rulebook. The Gripen's victory foreshadowed that shift, a preview of an era where agility and information dominance trump sheer mass and money. And there's something poetic about that. In a desert built for giants, a small Scandinavian fighter quietly reminded the world that the sharpest blade isn't always the heaviest one. So the next time you see a Saab Gripen in flight, don't think of it as a budget jet or a Nordic curiosity. Think of it as what it truly is, a masterpiece of pragmatic engineering, a triumph of brains over budgets, and proof that the quietest nations can still roar the loudest when it matters most. For months after the Nevada exercise, the story of the Swedish jet that humbled America's crown jewel spread like wildfire across military forums, defense conferences, and late-night bar conversations among pilots. Officially, everyone stayed diplomatic. Red flag results are confidential, after all. But word travels fast in aviation circles. There's a quiet way fighter pilots talk. Half whisper, half respect. The Gripen wasn't just lucky. It had exposed a truth many inside the industry had long suspected, but never dared say out loud. That the world's most expensive jet was only as unbeatable as the environment it controlled. To understand why the outcome shocked so many, you have to look beyond the dogfight itself. The real story wasn't about who won or lost. It was about philosophy. The F-35 and the Gripen are more than aircraft. They are two competing visions of how nations fight wars in the 21st century. The American approach is rooted in dominance. Control every variable, saturate the battle space with information, and crush the enemy before he knows he's in danger. It's an extension of U.S. strategy since World War II. Scale, power, and total technological overmatch. The Swedish model is the opposite. It accepts vulnerability as a constant and designs around it. Gripen's entire reason for being is survivability under chaos. In that sense, it reflects Sweden's geography and mindset. A small, exposed nation surrounded by great powers, forced to think several moves ahead. Saab's engineers knew Sweden could never afford fleets of $100 million stealth jets. So they created a machine that could think faster, adapt quicker, and operate cheaper than anything else in its class. They prioritized software flexibility over stealth coatings. Where the F-35 relies on secrecy, the Gripen relies on data fusion and deception. Its radar, EW suite, and infrared sensors can switch frequencies on the fly, confuse enemy missiles, or feed fake coordinates into hostile systems. In effect, it turns the electromagnetic spectrum into a chessboard, and it's always 3 moves ahead. Even the maintenance philosophy is revolutionary. The F-35 depends on Lockheed Martin's ALIS system, now Odin. a centralized digital brain that tracks every part and repair worldwide. It's powerful, but it also creates dependence. If the network goes down, so does your fleet. The Gripen, by contrast, can be serviced with laptops and local parts. Sweden designed it to survive a war where satellites and data links are jammed, an old-fashioned go dark scenario. In that world, simplicity isn't a weakness, it's a weapon. What many strategists missed is that stealth isn't invisibility, it's just delay. Every radar signature eventually shows up. Every data stream can be exploited. The Swedes simply understood that earlier. Their goal was never to hide forever, but to stay one step ahead long enough to strike first. That mindset is now echoing across the world. When Brazil bought the Gripen E, it wasn't just purchasing a fighter, it was buying independence. The deal allowed Brazil to co-produce and modify the jet locally, creating thousands of engineering jobs. No American company would ever allow that kind of tech transfer. For smaller nations, the Gripen represents freedom from dependency, the ability to build, upgrade, and fly without asking Washington for permission. Meanwhile, the United States continues to wrestle with the realities of the F-35 program. Its promised global fleet of 3,000 jets has been slowed by budget overruns and maintenance bottlenecks. The aircraft remains formidable, but expensive to keep in the air. For the price of 1 hour of F-35 flight, Sweden can keep 7 Gripens flying. Multiply that by a full conflict year, and the numbers become staggering. That economic logic has started to reshape defense thinking, even in NATO capitals. The war in Ukraine, where cost-effective drones and artillery duels dominate the headlines, reminded generals that quantity still has a quality of its own. A $200 drone swarm that wipes out a $5 million air defense radar changes how nations calculate power. In that same way, a $30 million Gripen that can outfox a $100 million stealth jet changes how they think about air dominance. There's also the question of sustainability. A fighter jet is only as useful as the number of times it can take off in a day. The Gripen's ability to refuel and rearm in 10 minutes on a rural road, using a small team and a truck, means it can sortie 3 or 4 times more often than an F-35 that requires climate-controlled hangars and contractor technicians. In a real war, that tempo is the difference between survival and annihilation. The F-35's defenders argue that its stealth and sensor fusion still make it unmatched in beyond visual range combat, and that's true on paper. But the Swedes never claimed otherwise. The genius of their design lies in context. Wars aren't fought on spreadsheets. They're fought in weather, terrain, and political chaos. Gripen was built for the ugly, imperfect battlefield where satellites go blind and runways disappear. It's the fighter you can fix in the snow, fuel with a truck, and get back in the air before the enemy reloads. Ironically, America once understood this philosophy. During the Cold War, U.S. aircraft like the F-16 embodied the same principles: light, agile, affordable. Over time, ambition and bureaucracy buried that simplicity under layers of complexity. The Gripen is, in a way, a spiritual successor to that lost era, a reminder of when engineers built fighters for pilots, not procurement committees. As global tensions rise again, from the Arctic Circle to the South China Sea, militaries are rediscovering the value of that approach. Information warfare and electronic combat now dominate modern doctrine. Every jet is a flying sensor node, part of a broader digital ecosystem. And here's where Sweden's foresight shines brightest. The Gripen's open architecture software allows nations to integrate their own weapons, data links, and AI algorithms without foreign permission. That's not just convenience, its sovereignty. The U.S., for all its might, often struggles to export the F-35 without strings attached. Every update, every spare part runs through American oversight. For Washington, that's strategic leverage. For buyers, it's dependence. The Gripen flips that script. It whispers, "You can trust us. We'll help you stand on your own." Even within the Pentagon, some analysts quietly admit the lesson. They see the Gripen as a warning that innovation isn't about money. It's about clarity of purpose. The F-35 is a Swiss Army knife made of gold. The Gripen is a scalpel forged for a single, brutal task. In an age of hypersonic missiles, AI drones, and electronic jamming, that kind of focused design may prove far more valuable than versatility. The symbolic power of the Gripen's victory can't be overstated. It showed that small nations still have a voice in shaping the future of warfare. It reminded engineers that brilliance isn't born from billion-dollar contracts, but from asking simple questions. What do we actually need? What can we maintain when the world is burning? And perhaps most importantly, it humbled an industry that had started to believe its own mythology. For too long, defense procurement rewarded size and spectacle over efficiency and resilience. The Gripen's success nudged that pendulum back toward sanity. Of course, Sweden isn't pretending to replace the F-35. The two jets serve different roles, and both have their place in the modern sky. But the contrast between them has become a global parable, one about ambition without limits, the other about wisdom within limits. Look around today's conflict zones, from Eastern Europe to the Indo-Pacific, and you can see echoes of that lesson everywhere. Nations are shifting from prestige projects to distributed power, fleets of cheaper, smarter systems that can fight even when communications fail. It's the same logic that made the Gripen dangerous. It's no longer about having the biggest sword. It's about wielding 100 knives faster than your opponent can count. Maybe that's why, 30 years after its debut, the little Swedish fighter still refuses to fade away. It keeps evolving. New engines, new avionics, new EW modules. The Gripen E is now capable of commanding drone swarms and sharing live data across continents. It's still relatively small, still affordable, still very Swedish, but its bite has only grown sharper. The F-35 will continue to dominate headlines, and rightly so. It's a marvel of engineering and a critical pillar of Western defense. But the Gripen will continue to haunt its shadow, a reminder that innovation isn't a monopoly of superpowers. Somewhere in the cold north, on a highway lined with pine trees, a team of young conscripts can still roll a fighter out of a truck shelter, fuel it with diesel, and send it screaming into the sky within 10 minutes. No fancy hangar, no billion-dollar infrastructure, just skill, discipline, and a machine that does exactly what it was built to do. That image, humble, efficient, defiant, is the true legacy of the Gripen. Not that it beat the F-35 in a mock battle, but that it proved something fundamental about power itself. That in the modern world, intelligence and adaptability are the new form of might. In an era obsessed with size, the smallest voice in the room reminded everyone that brains still matter, and sometimes they even fly.